Hi, welcome back to Grains in Small Places. I hope you had a wonderful 2024 and I wish you a fantastic 2025 to come. So I thought it would be great to kick things off with one of the most challenging or most questions or the recipe that most people have issues with. So we're going to be making 100% fresh milled flour sourdough artisan loaf. Yes, it can be done and it can be done well, but if you've been baking sourdough bread with white flour for years and years and years, you may have to forget some of those things that you've already learned, because this is a whole new ball game. Fresh milled flour with sourdough together is a whole new world of things, and it behaves very differently than white flour. So I want to show you some of my tips and tricks, some of the things you can do. This is a base recipe, then you can add inclusions to it. You can tweak it to how you like it, but this is just a way to get started. This is all done in one day, so you would start it in the morning and then you would bake it at night. I like to let it rest overnight before you slice into it if you have self-control. So I will share with you throughout this video my tips, tricks, and recipe. I will make sure to put the recipe linked in the description box below. That way you can print it off and follow along. So let's go ahead and jump in and let's get started. All right, to start out, we're going to mill our grain. So what I'm going to do is weigh out my wheat berries. I'm using hard white wheat. Make sure you zero out your vessel, because yes, I forgot to do that before. Okay, so this is all the hard white wheat that I have left, because I have a Azure pickup order coming in a couple days, looks like. And the last Azure order, if you saw, they did not have any of the hard white wheat in stock. So we're probably gonna have to make this work and use some other grains. So that's all that I have left. That's 341 grams. I need 500 grams. So I'm going to use some kamut. This is more than I would normally use, but also I think I might throw in a little bit of hard red in here. So just play with the grains and see which way is your family's favorite, which grains you guys like better for which different things that you're cooking. Because there's some grains that I prefer for certain things over others. I do have a little video talking about some of the common wheat berries and what to use them for. But I'm gonna go ahead and get this weighed out to the 500. This is some hard red. I'll make sure to put a link below to the things that you see me using in the video, like these grain bins. I get lots of questions about them, and my mill. Okay, and some of the other things that I'm going to be using. So let's head on over to the mill. I'm using my Nutrimill Impact Grain Mill to mill the grain. I have a coupon code for you. That coupon code is GRAINY, and it will get you $20 off your mill. I have been loving using this mill. Okay, now that we have our freshly milled flour. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is grab my bowl, put it on my scale, and zero it out. And the first thing we're gonna do is start out with our water. And we want to use filtered water, so not chlorinated water, because the chlorine in the water can actually kill your sourdough cultures. So whatever you're feeding it with is fine. And we're going to use about 450 grams, and I accidentally had it on ounces. So I wanted to talk about the flour a little bit, the fresh milled flour. So today I've told you I usually use mostly hard white, or a mix of hard white and hard red, or a little bit of one of the ancient grains. But I get a lot of questions about making it out of einkorn or kamut or spelt. Well, the ancient grains don't really have a high amount of gluten, and we don't get the nice stretchy dough. However, I will talk to you a little bit later about making a loaf with more or a lot of freshly milled einkorn, kamut, or spelt, what you can do to do that and still get those wonderful results. So here's our sourdough starter. I'm going to use about 115 grams of this, so I'm going to zero this out to make this math way easier for me. And this was fed the night before. So even if you fed your starter yesterday morning, you want to make sure that you feed it the night before as well, so that it's nice and ready to go, because if this is a tired starter, then you're going to not get the results that you want. So I get some questions asking about the float test. Well, when you see, as you see when I'm scooping this out, I'm smashing a lot of the air bubbles as I get this out of the jar. The float test passes because there's air bubbles in our starter. You can see this still kind of wants to float because there is some air in here, but I don't generally go by just the float test because I know my starter has been doubling. It's ready to go. I make bread often with this. So as long as it's doubling consistently and you're getting the nice rises out of your starter, it's ready to go. So the float test really is more for white flour sourdough. Now you can get it to float. That is a possibility. So I'm just going to mix this around now. I know you probably are saying, why are you using a metal bowl? I've read that you can't use a metal bowl. Well, as long as it's not copper or silver or a metal that kills bacteria naturally, you're fine. This is a stainless steel bowl. Feel free to use a ceramic or a glass bowl, plastic bowl, whatever you feel the most comfortable with. But I have no problems using this stainless steel bowl. So we're going to grab our flour. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, once I've been using this mill a little bit more, I wanted to let you know that you want to make sure to turn this and let this flour out in your recipe. Oops, well, I'll wash that. Because that is the fine flour that it mills. So I always make sure that I put it in my recipe. Okay, and then I'm just gonna put the flour that we milled in here. This is the 500 grams right in here. Okay, and I mentioned to you earlier about making a loaf of bread with ancient grains. And this is one of the tricks that you can do. So I know, wait, hold up. I'm talking about vital wheat gluten. I know I don't normally use vital wheat gluten. I know I say that you don't need it, especially for yeast breads, but for sourdough breads, I have been experimenting and playing with this. I've been using only about 20 grams and I get really nice results. Now this really still is optional. You don't have to use vital wheat gluten. I've made plenty of wonderful sourdough breads without the vital wheat gluten with no issues. But if you want it to look a little bit more like the ones that you see on social media, it does take a little bit of either kneading time or vital wheat gluten, because fresh milled flour takes a little bit more work than white flour does to develop that gluten. So this is a shortcut. It is not necessary, but I found putting it in a little bit of sourdough does definitely help. I also find that since the sourdough is helping break down the stuff, it's kind of worth it to me to add it to my sourdough products. Okay, and the last thing is salt. So I'm gonna zero this out again. We're gonna use about 15 grams of salt. If that's high to you, you can use as little as 10 with good results. But this is the most of our flavor in the bread. If you're doing inclusions or anything like that, then you may want to use less if it's a salty inclusion. I do have several recipes on my blog. I have like a cheddar cheese, or you can add jalapenos. You can do that. I also have a sweeter inclusions with like blueberries. I'm adding more and more as we go, but I wanted to go over, this is my absolute favorite salt. I use it for baking. I use it for cooking. I use it for all the things now. I got it the very first time at Azure Standard, but since then I've been able to also order from Baja Gold, the company itself. And I do have a coupon code down in the description box below where you can save 10% off of your salt order if you want to try this out. But it is a lovely salt, and they have like a fine grind and a thicker grind, but it is a little bit of a wet salt because it is not processed and it's higher in minerals. So I'm just going to mix all of this together. And I know that you're probably also saying, what are you doing? You usually mix your salt in later. Well, I've been working with a recipe so that I could help make an easier sourdough. So we're just mixing everything together. We want this to, all the flour to be incorporated so there's no dry flour left. If you want that more traditional sourdough loaf where I go over all of the stages of like Autolyse and bench rest and bulk fermentation and all of that, I do have a sourdough recipe like that. But this one is kind of like quick and easy, beginner. Let's get started using our sourdough. If you are interested in making your own sourdough starter because you don't have one yet, I do have a video and a blog post on how to make your own sourdough starter with freshly milled flour. Or grab some sourdough from a friend and start feeding it your freshly milled flour, even if theirs is white flour. Or there's no shame in buying a sourdough culture online if you want to go ahead and get started and not have to start from scratch. So there's lots of options out there. I will put a link to one of the cultures that I found has been amazing down in the description box below. I've tried a few of them and I really was happy with this one and some of their products you'll see me using. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but I will share that with you since I seem to really like it. So now we've got all of this mixed together. I've just been using these little shower caps for covering this. So what I'm going to do is cover this for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll do our very first stretch and fold. So you can see here, there's no dry flour left. It's very chunky and non-smooth, not very stretchy, breaks pretty easy. That's normal at this stage. So we'll cover that, and then I'll be back in about 30-40 minutes to show you what it looks like. Okay, so it has been 30 minutes. So you can see here, it still looks shaggy. What we're gonna do is our first stretch and fold. So what I mean by that, you can do this in different ways. Some people do coil folds, which is where you pick up from the middle and let one side go over and then the other. But I think the easiest way to go through this is just a stretch and fold. So what that is you're gonna grab from the bottom and you're gonna give it a little stretch and you're gonna pull it over. So each time you do a stretch and fold, it's going to get a little bit stretchier and a little bit nicer of a dough. So this stage is going to take somewhere between 3 and 5 hours, depending on your sourdough starter, depending on the heat and humidity in your house. It varies for everyone, which is why I can't give you an exact time. So I say look for 20 to 30% rise in your dough, which is sometimes hard to tell, but each time you do a stretch and fold, you're going to notice that the dough, like I said, gets softer and stretchier and less sticky. If your dough ever gets really like lax or lazy, that means that you may have gone past your peak and that your dough is already starting to kind of fold down. So that's kind of like a coil fold where you'll pick up from the middle and then you'll put your dough down like this. So basically what you're trying to do is just create some surface tension, build that gluten up, make it stronger. As you can see, it sticks to my hands a little bit. To stop that from happening so much, you can get your hands wet. So I'm just gonna cover this. It's gonna go back and it's just gonna rise at room temperature. And we're gonna come back in about 30 to 60 minutes. This does not need to be by the book. You do not have to set your timer and come back every 30 minutes. In fact, I've missed some stretch and folds. Basically, what you're wanting to do is just anytime you walk past and you think about it, do a stretch and fold. You can do it, you know, do one in 15 minutes and then do one in 45 minutes or whatever. You're just continuing to do that to build this gluten structure up while it's doing its rise. So you don't want to deflate all of the air out of it or anything like that. You want to just be gentle with it. If your home is warmer or your kitchen is warmer, you're going to notice that this happens a lot faster, and it may only take 3.5, 4 hours. I'm in Florida right now. It has been pretty warm, and about 4 hours every time it was ready to go to the next stage. Today it's a little bit cooler, so we'll find out. It may go a little bit longer, but I am putting it in my little countertop oven and the proofing function so that it doesn't stay too cold. If your kitchen is really cold, I recommend putting your dough in like the microwave with a cup of like hot water so that it keeps your dough warm, or in the oven with the light on, something like that. If you have a proofing box, you can use that. But if your home is below 70 degrees, it's going to take a long time for this to rise, and then it's not going to turn out how you're hoping. It will sometimes overproof or just take forever to proof. So you really want to keep it at a nice room temperature, and you also don't want it to be too hot because then it can interfere and overproof quickly. Just lots of issues. So try not to overcomplicate it. Just try to keep it nice, just a little bit snug, warm environment. And I think you'll find that you're happier with the results. So I'm going to come back in about 30 minutes or so. We'll check on the stretchiness of this dough. All right, I wanted to show you these nifty little Bannetons that I found. They are 100% cotton, which I was super excited about. As you know, I have a small space. So these are really nice because they fold up small like this, and then they have little hanging things. So I just leave them hung up on a little hook. And then these are cotton, so you can use them just like this, but they do come with liners. So they have liners like this. So this is machine washable. This is machine washable. And I just love these because I have tried so many different Bannetons and been kind of unhappy with them. These so far are my absolute favorite. So basically what happens when you put your dough in the Banneton, you're wanting that to kind of form that outside skin to where it starts to dry out. Well, there's a whole bunch, there's like silicone Bannetons, which, as you know, that keeps all the moisture in, so you're not going to get the results that you're hoping for. I'm not saying they don't work, they do work. But if you get a Banneton that nurtures that drying out process on that outside, it also helps to score. So what I like to do is put this in here, just give it a little spritz of water. A lot of people don't mention that, but little spritz of water all around the outside. Do not drench this, but then you're going to sprinkle it with your flour. I use regular fresh milled flour in my Bannetons because I don't have anybody that has gluten sensitivities, so I can just use regular flour. If you are making this for somebody that has gluten sensitivities, or someone that says I can only eat sourdough, then you want to mill some dried rice and use rice flour. And you can do that in your mill as well. So you can have fresh rice flour. You're going to dust it with rice flour. So the reason they use rice flour here is, one, it helps the dough to not stick. But I haven't had any problems with this particular Banneton setup with regular flour. And then two, because it doesn't have any gluten. So when you're using regular flour on the outside of this loaf and you put your sourdough loaf in here, nothing is fermenting this new flour that you put on. So it could potentially cause an issue for somebody, which is why they recommend to use the rice flour. So whichever flour you want to put that with, but just spritz it with a little bit of water. It sticks. You want to put it like this all around the edges. You'll see me do it here in just a moment. This recipe that we're making today, I'm going to have a link to the recipe in the description box below. It's slightly different than my original sourdough recipe, which I have on my blog. This one calls for just a very, very short refrigerator fermentation time. I know a lot of you are asking, I want it to be more sour. I want to do a fridge ferment. I want to be able to put it in a Banneton. So this is the easy recipe for doing all of those things, except for an overnight ferment. I still do not recommend an overnight ferment. I find that it over ferments the dough, makes the dough not only just sour, but also acidic. So I'm not saying it's impossible to do an overnight ferment, but you need to play with the amount of sourdough starter that you're using in the dough, decreasing that by quite a bit so that it doesn't over ferment by the time morning comes. So we're putting this in the Banneton in the fridge for only about 1 to 3 hours. If you don't like super sour sourdough, you can bake it without putting it in the Banneton. If you like just a mild sourdough, you can do 1 hour in the fridge and then bake it. If you want it to be more sour, I find 3 hours, I say, is almost too much sour for me, but my husband says he loves it like that. He would even do more sour, but I find after that 3 hours in the fridge, it really starts to kind of degrade quickly. So I want to make sure that I stress that, because a lot of people have tried my other sourdough recipe and then put it in the fridge overnight and then had a hockey puck and they didn't know why. They thought it was the recipe, but I really, with fresh mulled flour, how quickly it ferments, I really push against an overnight ferment. But putting it in the Banneton for a couple hours in the fridge will give you a similar result. This recipe calls for 1 large loaf. So you can use the circle, you can use the batard, the longer oval one. I like these because my oven is small, so I'd rather my dough go this way than too far this way, because otherwise I get really close to the burners on top. Also, I'll show you later what I end up baking mine in that I have been loving. I don't have a Dutch oven that fits quite perfectly in my oven. I used to have one. I don't have it anymore. It kind of lost kitchen space to some of my other things. So you can also use this recipe. I will sometimes cut it in half and make 2 really mini loaves. I'll make like 1 plain and 1 flavored or something like that. Or you can double this recipe and it'll get you 2 large loaves if you have a regular oven with 2 Dutch ovens that you can use, or bake one at 1 hour and then pull this one out and bake it at 3 hours. So there's my little spiel. Oh, and also I forgot to mention, this setup also comes with this little cover, which is also, of course, machine washable. So I just use these while putting it in the refrigerator, and I love it all because I can throw it all in the wash. I wash these every time. If you have a place to keep them, you can keep the flour coated on them like that, but I just don't prefer that. So I wash the liners every time, and then these I only wash when they get dirty because nothing's really touching them. I try not to like rub them over top of my dough to get the bottoms dirty. I like to keep those clean as much as possible. So we'll set this to the side until our dough is ready. Then I'll show you how we do the flouring and all of that of these. Okay, we are at the second 30-minute mark. It's a little bit smoother. Let's check the stretchiness. It's actually got a little bit of rise to it. You can see we're getting a little more stretch, but it's still wanting to tear and break. Just gonna do some more of these stretch and folds. And then cover that back up, and we'll be back again in 30 to 60 minutes and check on it again. Okay, so I wanted to put this in here really quick to give you just an idea of what we're dealing with and what our sourdough starter actually is telling us. So if I go in here closer, you can see how this has risen up to this area, and now it's starting to deflate. So when it's rising, you're gonna have like a dome. When it's already peaked and then falling, it will start to look concave a little bit. So that gives you an idea is this sourdough starter has already peaked and it is now falling. When it falls all the way back down to where we fed it before, it'll be ready to feed it again. This is actually one of the better times to use your sourdough starter, but honestly, I've made bread from this peaked and falling. Both ways will work. But another thing I wanted to show you is you can see the open holes here from where it doubles. This kind of gives you an idea of what kind of crumb that you'll have when you make your sourdough bread. So if you have a sourdough starter when it's doubled and they're just little teeny tiny little holes like you'll see up here, that generally means that your crumb is going to be a little bit tighter. But if you see here where you have these larger holes, that gives you an idea of kind of a more even crumb. It's just one of those tips that I've learned over the times experimenting with sourdough. So sometimes if yours only is ever getting these tiny little bubbles, which the reason these are tiny bubbles is because this is on the way back down, that may be because either your sourdough starter is not strong enough or it's needing to be fed more food. Some people will make it really liquidy and watery, and so that it's hard for it to be able to hold up to these larger air bubbles, which then can affect your bread as well. So I just wanted to kind of pop in here while my starter was at this falling point so that you could see it really good where it's kind of concave and going back down. Okay, so about every 30 to 60 minutes, I did stretch and folds, turn the bowl a quarter turn. I kept this in my proofer at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, so it was pretty much ready to go at about 3.5, maybe 4 hours. Okay, so over the last few hours, we did a bunch of stretch and folds, and then put it back into the proofer and then stretch and folds. And each time you can see it's getting a little bit looser and stretchier. It's rising a little bit, and you can even see little air bubbles forming. So we can go ahead and move on to the next step. All right, it has now been about 4 hours, give or take. You can see the dough has risen. Okay, so what we're gonna do is spritz this with just a tiny bit of water so that our flour sticks. And then I just have some already milled flour. And then I'm just gonna kind of tap this around so that it coats. If there's extra bran in there, that's fine, no biggie. You can flour your work surface if you want to. I find that the dough usually comes out pretty nice without it. So I'm gonna just set this up here. You can see some of the bran. And then we're gonna just take this, I'm gonna set that up higher, and dump this out onto our work surface. And it comes out nicely without sticking. So what I'm gonna do is just gently flatten this out into just a rectangle loosely. This is also where if you want to add your inclusions, you can sprinkle half of them in here, which I do have some other recipes for that on my blog as well. And then you would fold them in like this, sprinkle some more inclusions, and then roll it up. So we're wanting the end result to have a nice surface tension. So we're going to roll this, pull it a little bit, roll it, pull it, roll it, pull it, till we get to the end. And then so our seam side is down. And so what I'm going to do is put it in my basket seam side up, and I don't really want to rub it all over this dirty part of my counter. Matt, will you hold the Banneton for me, please? Because it's not getting the view over there towards me more. So we're going to flip this over so that the seam side is up and place it in the Banneton. And then you're just going to pinch the edges closed, because we want this to have some tension on it. And you may have seen online where there are people that do some, they call it stitching, where you kind of do this on the edges. And what's that's doing is creating surface tension. And this part being ugly doesn't really matter, because this is going to be on the bottom side when we go to bake it. Give it a wiggle. So you can see it's nice and soft. We're going to cover this up, and I'm going to put it in the fridge for at least an hour, up to 3 hours, but no longer. You're going to start out preheating your oven to 480 degrees Fahrenheit for 35 minutes with the top on for the steam. And then you're going to decrease the oven to 450 for 20 to 25 minutes with the top off. And you're going to want to make sure that you temp the loaf to be sure that it's done. Generally, I like to temp the loaf to 210 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so I said I would let you know what I was going to be using. If you have a Dutch oven, of course, use that. But this stainless steel baking pan, which is actually like a cake baking pan that has a stainless steel lid, is what I've been using lately. I'm just going to put my parchment paper in here, but this lid goes on here. Occasionally, if I have a really good rise, it will touch the top of my pan, but I'm not too worried about that. So what I'm going to do is grab my loaf out of the fridge. Okay. And I'm going to get my little bread lame, which scoring is actually optional. If you don't want to score your bread, you do not have to, but you have to be very careful with these because they get very sharp, or they are very sharp. This one I like. There's many different kinds that you can use, but you can pick which one you think is the best for you. So I'm going to go ahead and take off this. And then we've got the seam side up, and then we're going to just, you can either take this and put it on top and flip it over, or just put this right here on top. So there's that. Then I just like to take this liner off, and then I can wash that. Okay, I just want to make sure this is kind of centered in here. It's got a little funny belly here, but that's okay. All right, so there are many different ways that you can score this, or you can not score it and you can let the bread burst on its own. There are a couple tricks to some of the loaves that you may see online floating around. I'm just going to take this loose flour and with these longer batard loaves, I like to just put like a straight line down. So that's what we're going to do. If you want the kind that have the little ear that comes up, you want to take this, you're wanting to score actually not straight down, you're wanting to score actually just under the little skin that's developed. And you want to try to do it in one motion so that you don't have any issues with the dough hanging up or anything like that. And then if you want to do any of these cute little wheat stalks, or just however you want to do this, is up to your own imagination. But what I'm going to do is take this and I'm going to cover it, and we're going to bake it at that high temperature. And then we'll take the top off and I'll let you see what it looks like. And then we will open bake it for the rest of the way. Oh, actually I was going to also show you there are ovens preheated, and you could also spray this with some water, which helps with the steam. And now we're going to put the lid on and we're going to pop this into the oven. Very hot oven. So when you go to take that out of the oven, be very careful because it is very hot. So there's also a trick to scoring. There is this little thing that some people will do and to get those really large ears, I guess you want to call them, the part where it sticks up on the loaf. And what they'll do is put it in the oven and then pull it out at about 5 or 6 minutes, right where it has like a little skin on the outside, and then score it just below the surface so that it makes that pop up a little bit more. I did not do that today. I generally don't do that, but that's a little tip that you can try just to experiment with. Once you get your loaf going, it's just one of those fun things that some people enjoy doing if you're somebody that's interested in the different scoring techniques and things. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today while we made our sourdough loaf. I hope this was informative for you. I hope this helped you, and it gives you a jumping point where you can go ahead and tweak this to however you prefer your sourdough. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends, and thanks for stopping by Grains in Small Places. Goodbye.